The other day I was oh, geez. The other day I was on Instagram and I was reminded of this idea of type 2 fun. Are you familiar with this idea? Type 2 fun is simply defined as like things that aren't really fun in the moment, but then in retrospect, they are fun or they become fun. Actually, now that I think about it, the reason that I saw it on Instagram was from my friend Deidre. She is at Route to Happiness on Instagram. She is hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, which goes from Mexico to Canada through the United States. And she was posting something on there, and people were commenting, this is an example of type 2 fun, where she's like miserable going through all this deep brush on the trail. And it's just kind of, brings you to like, why is someone doing something like that? Well, this idea of type 2 fun felt fitting for the conversation that you're going to listen to today, the conversation that I had with my guest, Christine Reed. Christine is also a hiker. She's a hiker. She is an author. She is a creator. She's an entrepreneur. She is many things. And one of those in particular is that she's a thru hiker. Part of why I wanted to have Christine on the show today is to understand, like, why do people do that? I actually have an interest in doing that. She did the Appalachian Trail. She also did the Wonderland Trail and wrote a book about it called Alone in Wonderland. She also recently released her second book, which is called Blood, Sweat, Tears, and it's a culmination of stories from women who are hikers and adventurers. But it was fun to just get some of her perspective on, like, what is being on one of these trails where you're hiking hundreds, if not thousands of miles? What is it actually like? Like, take us through that, and why do you do things like this? I don't know. I find it endlessly fascinating when people engage in activities that maybe I don't fully understand, and wanting to understand what goes through their minds. What's the appeal of it? Christine and I talked about this idea of just getting really jazzed up for people when you engage with someone and you ask about some hobby that they have or something that they like doing, and they get really excited or really energized. It's hard not to find that a contagious feeling where you're like, wow, I'm just excited and I'm fired up that you're excited about this thing. And I think if we can engage people in that way and be curious about the thing that they're really excited about, I find, and I share in this conversation, that there's usually something that we can kind of mine from that, something that we can apply to our own lives, maybe not in the moment, but maybe in the future. So in this conversation, the idea of being a thru hiker, the idea of writing books, becoming an author, being an entrepreneur, these are the things that it's like, all right, it seemed like Christine is really jazzed up about these things. Some of them I either do or aspire to do, want to do. Some maybe I don't, but I'm just curious about why is she so passionate about these things? And it led to a really, really fun conversation. I'm not sure I've ever laughed more on this podcast in a conversation than I did in this one with Christine. So if I had fun during it, I think you're really going to enjoy listening to it. And here it is next. You said I'm a storyteller as we were having some conversation about getting going in this podcast. Have you always been?
Yes, it has taken many different forms in my life, but I think as a young child, I was very eager to have eyes on me. Like I was very much a kid who was like dancing and like singing and just like trying to be the star of the show. And I would say I had a little bit of that kind of like knocked out of me as a tween around the age like 10, 11, 12. Just from like bullying and kids being terrible. And it took me a few years, kind of into like college when I started to really start to like enjoy storytelling in more of like a traditional format where it's like, I just like to like tell people things and make them laugh and get a reaction out of people. And, a little bit less like, look at me and more like, putting something on for the enjoyment of the people around me. And that sort of segued then into now writing books and creating content for people.
Okay. I want to dissect more of like, what is it within you in this act of telling stories, whether it's verbally or if you're writing a book? Why is that an experience that you really enjoy? What does that fulfill within you, or why is this act of storytelling so important and becomes such an important part of your life?
I think it's largely to do with the connection that is formed between people through story. I think there's something really powerful and magical about words and the ability to like cause someone to have an emotional experience through what you're saying. And I think when you are sharing an emotional experience with somebody, that like really deepens your social connection with them. Even if it's, you know, standing on a stage in front of 100 people and like you're talking to them and then maybe at the end they ask a question, but like forming those connections, there's lots of different levels and lots of different ways we can do that. But I think story is like the core of emotional connection.
Yeah, I think everyone can relate to a story. We've all experienced them. We all have our own stories. And so when someone can be a compelling communicator, compelling storyteller, it has this opportunity to bring people together. Now, the stories that you are telling happen to be very real stories, vulnerable stories. How has that experience been? You know, I think I can resonate with the idea of wanting to get into storytelling to create connection. And has that always been the experience? And how has it felt to share what are very real and personal elements of your own story?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we connect most with vulnerable stories because when you reveal yourself to be soft and flawed and human, like those are the things we identify within ourselves. And so when we see them in other people, we think, oh, that person is like me. If you tell stories in which you're always the hero and like things are always going great and everything's always just like sunshine and rainbows, like people don't relate to that very much. Like we've all had a good day, sure, but like we know our flaws and we carry them with us 100% of the time, right? So like we always see ourselves as like having weaknesses and having flaws and like those, I suppose you might say negative aspects, but I don't really think of it that way. Those are the things that I think most closely relate to. So when we see even just a glimpse of those things in other people and in their stories, those are the things that we latch onto and go, oh, like that person is like me.
Has vulnerability always been a characteristic of your storytelling?
I mean, probably not when I was a small child. I think that we at some point have to make a decision to be vulnerable unless we were just really fortunate in the way that we were raised and weren't taught to be ashamed. But I don't think that's how most of us were raised. And I definitely don't think that's how most of us ended up if we went through a phase of like bullying and like dealing with those things, right? Like we tend to put a hard shell on ourselves when we go through those kind of social experiences. And then later we have to then undo that process, like come back to the core of who we are.
Is that part of your story? So the bullying experiences that you've talked about in some of your teen years, is that where did you kind of form this hardened shell that maybe was less willing to be vulnerable? For sure. Yeah. And I will say, like, as I kind of came back out of my shell a little bit, like some of the earlier phases were really more like comedy based. Like in my early 20s, I was really into just like saying wild things to make people laugh. And I will say that when you're doing like comedy style storytelling does tend to be fairly guarded. And almost like, this is going to sound weird, almost a little bit manipulative. Like we use language to get a reaction out of people. And so when you are seeing yourself in like a comedic role, or trying to, you know, like comedians who are preparing, material to do on stage, like you're practicing it and you're like telling the same jokes to different people to see how they react. And then you're like tweaking the language. And I will say I definitely like went through a phase of that where I was like, ooh, like, you know, I'll like tell a story and see where are people laughing and like what's the timing of the story, like how should I change and adjust the timing of the story to like get the reaction that I want. And I wouldn't characterize that as a super vulnerable experience. It's almost the opposite. And then it took some time to develop out of that into like where I am now. But interesting nonetheless, you know, to have the, I don't know, foresight to, okay, let me try to, you know, let me really observe people and how they receive the things that I'm saying. And then it leads me down an interesting route of thinking of, and I'm curious some of your perspective as an author, as a writer. When you're thinking about creating, when you're thinking about whether it's this comedy example in your 20s or you're thinking about writing a book now, how much are you considering the audience and how the audience is going to react to the story that you're telling versus just the purity of the thing that it is that you want to share? How are you balancing those two? I know what's probably happening right now. You just heard the ad music play. You're starting to tune out exactly what I'm saying so you can skip this ad and get back to the conversation, and I'm going to encourage you not to. Because if you continue to skip this ad in order to get back to the conversation, then at some point there may not be a conversation for you to get back to. Okay, now that I have your attention, that might have been a little bit exaggerated. Likely, I'm not going to stop producing this show, but you can help me make this show a lot more viable, and so I can continue doing this into the future. Fun fact, I don't make any money from this show. In fact, I actually pay in order to create these episodes on a weekly basis. And while that may not exactly seem like your problem or your issue, if you like meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here, well, then it is your problem. I could use your help in the form of financial support specifically in order to keep this show going and continually invest back into creating it. Here's another fun fact. If everyone listening to this episode were to donate the single cost of a cup of coffee, I could probably do this as a full-time job. That is a dream and a vision I have for myself one day, and I want this to be like PBS or NPR, where it's funded by the viewers. I'm imagining a show where we, together, collectively, decide that these meaningful conversations are important to us, and we don't rely on outside help or advertisers in order to keep them coming on a weekly basis. So yes, this is a long-winded way of saying I'm asking you for money. If you're in a place where you feel comfortable doing so, I am asking you to make a small donation to support the show. You can do that by following the link that is in the show notes of this episode to a place called Buy Me a Coffee. Now, by buying me a coffee through this platform, you're not actually buying me a coffee. It's just kind of a mental construct to make this transaction of money a little bit more tangible. Thank you in advance for considering supporting me, supporting the show, and for supporting meaningful conversations like the one we're about to get back to right now.
I think that that's a really tricky thing to navigate as a storyteller, and finding the right balance is like, that is the magic of storytelling, is like finding the balance. And I would say for sure through the process, I probably lean harder towards thinking about the audience. Like, there are things that I want to talk about because I think that they're important and I think that people will benefit from it. And in some ways, I'm putting myself in the audience of like, I want to write this because I want someone else to write this. I want this to exist as a member of the greater audience. And so I'm thinking about the benefit of telling the story for myself in terms of like processing through things. But I do kind of believe that like as a writer, you have to think about the audience. And some people are like, oh, art for the creation of art. Like, cool, that's great. And then some people are like, oh, writing is a form of processing or a self-therapy or like whatever, I journal, like those things. And I think there's tons of benefit to that. But like what you write in your journal is generally not going to be publishable. And most people don't want to read that. So it's like, if you're writing for your own benefit, great, do that. Like, I'm in no way dissuading people from writing for their own benefit. Don't publish that. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And I think as somebody who like writes for an audience, I'm always thinking at least partly about the audience.
I find it to be a very difficult balance to find when creating in general. I'm not an author at this moment, although I do aspire to be one. So we'll just put that out there. But in anything you're creating, especially when you are creating something and an element of your income and your lifestyle depends on that thing that you are creating. You know, like you said, if you're just doing it for like a personal creation, okay, that's one thing. If your lifestyle depends on it, then it adds a whole nother level of pressure to it. And then I feel like, you know, it's hard to just focus on creating for the act of creating. Do you find when you add maybe the financial element to it, or like just needing to meet some of your needs and it's more of a business, does that apply a different approach?
It definitely can put a lot of pressure on the process and make it not fun.
Yeah.
But what I've been finding this year is that it does help to have some other form of income on occasion to be like, okay, like I can take the pressure off of this project or whatever I'm working on. And it also helps to have another form of creative outlet. And so this year I've been doing more like visual art, and I was living out in the desert and I met like a woodworker and somebody who was really into wire wrapping and like several painters, and I just started doing visual art, which I've never really done before, and that also has helped me really like get into a creative flow outside of my writing so that I don't feel like I'm trying to both serve my creative needs and like the product that I'm creating in the same moment. Like I can separate those things a little bit, which has been helpful for me.
It's cool. I think you just made me think about this podcast in a different way, and I think that's pretty much what this fulfills for me. This is a hobby. This is something that I do for fun. I really enjoy it. It's very meaningful for me, and I think I'm a marketer. I run my own marketing consulting business, and I think it does inject an element of creativity. I get filled up by these conversations. They energize me. They give me different perspectives, like you just did now. And I think I can then take elements of what I gain from these conversations and then apply them to other areas of my life. So I think that's cool. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I think that is part of the value of having creation especially creation that maybe doesn't have to be something. Like, as you're doing some of this more, visual stuff, and if there's not the pressure of like, this doesn't have to be part of my business, I can just explore. That feels really important as creators.
Yeah. Sometimes I just want to have fun and I don't want to like have to sell this later. I think our generation and like with the economy right now, the way it is, I do feel like every single person I know who like creates anything is like trying to figure out how to make money doing it. And I'm like,
yeah.
Could we not? Like, could we just do things sometimes for the sake of it and not try to monetize every single thing that we do?
Yeah, that is hard because I think there is value. Like I say all that, and yet I'm always trying to find ways to monetize this podcast. And I'm like, well, but it would be nice if I'm doing it anyway, it would be nice to make some money. I guess it's just a reminder of, well, it doesn't have to be the only solution. There are other ways. It is okay for things to just be outlets.
Yeah. And it's also okay to like make money at things that you love, but don't ruin them by making it about the money,
Have you had that experience before where something like, I'm curious about writing, as someone who just enjoyed writing and now it is part of your life, your career. Have you felt some of that? Some of the joy, some of the love of it is it diminished? Has it changed? What's the relationship to the writing been like?
So this is like an interesting thing. I didn't enjoy writing. I wrote in school and I was good at it and it wasn't torturous to me. But between the time I finished college and the time I decided to write a book, I didn't really write. I wasn't a journal keeper. I did not write for my own entertainment. I love to read. And I read 100+ books a year most years. And I will say becoming a writer and reading for the sake of research and for knowing what's going on in the genre and for doing book swaps with other authors and reading their books and leaving reviews. Like I have made reading a part of my business and a part of my job. And that has been a bit of a back and forth for me. There have been times where I'm like, oh my God, I cannot read another trail book right now. And I feel like I'm just like slogging through and I'm like, it's not that the book is bad. It's that I'm just like, this is like the 11th one of these I've read in a row. And so I have had to sort of like pace myself a little bit differently and remember that I like to read things that aren't related to what I'm writing, and do a little bit more of that. But yeah, the writing itself, like I do, there are moments when, when you write something and you're just like, wow, those look really good.
Yes.
Like I have those moments and I like, there are lots of subjects I'm really interested in talking about. And it's really lovely when someone reads something that you've written and they reach out and you get to talk about it. And like, there's lots of things I love about writing now that I am a professional writer. But I did not write as a hobby or for fun before then.
So what then made you want to become a writer. That's interesting.
Yeah. I hiked the Wonderland Trail in 2018 and I was just like dealing with a lot emotionally. And I had just moved into my first van. I was on the road for the first time. I was super lonely and trying to figure out how to like make connections. And I was struggling a lot with that. And I went and hiked the Wonderland Trail sort of as a way to like plug back into the trail community and meet friends. And out on the trail, I started having conversations with people and I was doing my storytelling thing. And I was just like, yeah, I'm just like really struggling with this and like asking people questions. What do you think about loneliness? What do you think about independence? Like, is your search for independence as related to like being a hiker and being outdoors, like serving you in any way? You know, I was just like asking a lot of probing questions. And by the end of that 11 days on trail, I thought, I really want to tell this story. Like because I was feeling so alone in my aloneness that as soon as I started asking other people, do you feel alone? And then they were like, oh my God, yes. Like, let's talk about that. I could just see how eager people were to have the conversation that nobody was asking the question and inviting them to have that. And so I was like, I think I could be the person to invite people into this conversation. And for some reason, a book just seemed like the right format for that. And so it was just like, there's this thing I want to talk about. I think a book is the right way to do it. And so I guess I'm just going to write a book now.
Which I love that story because I feel like, you know, most authors, you expect the answer to be like, oh, ever since I was 4, you know, I've been writing every single day and I have 7,000 poems that I've written and 20 short stories. And so it's cool to hear that your story is like, well, it just kind of made sense as an outlet to tell a certain story.
Yeah, it just seemed like the right thing in that moment. And I think because I had read so much from such a young age, I've been a big reader since I was like 4 years old. So like I've touched a lot of books in my life. And I think there was just this part of me that was like, how hard could it be? And like these people, libraries are full of books, bookstores are full of books. There's like gajillions of people writing books. I'm sure I could figure it out.
Was it hard?
Yeah. Yeah, I was stupid. Like that was a very naive thing for me to say. But I think sometimes naivete allows us to jump into things we would otherwise hesitate. If I knew how hard writing a book is, I might not have tried to do it.
Okay, so I'm curious about some of the other things in your life that you've jumped into. We share the experience of living in a van, and you mentioned, you know, part of the Wonderland Trail in particular was, you know, some of this journey of living in the van, exploring independence, loneliness. Walk us back in the journey a little bit of, let's use the van example. What brought you to decide, I'm going to go try living in a van?
I lived in Colorado and hung out with a lot of rock climber people. And I had heard about this. And then I was like, oh, I bet I could do that because I've hiked, like I've backpacked long distance and I can live out of a backpack. So why couldn't I live out of a van? I don't know. It just seemed like it couldn't be that hard. Yeah, I felt, and I do strongly believe that the like through hiker to van lifer pipeline is pretty solid because like if you can live out of a backpack for months, then a van is like luxury, you know.
Okay, so then let's go back a step back and take us to how did you jump into through hiking? I had heard you say somewhere, I think it was on one of your interviews, you had talked about this time in your life that I think was referring to when you got into through hiking, that you were searching for something to be about. And I really just liked that phrase because I feel like I can resonate with that, in that feeling of like, I want to be about something. And trying to figure out what that is. So was that part of what led you to say, you know what, I think I'm going to go live out of a backpack for a few months?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I was definitely, you know, as a kid, my parents were very focused on my academic success. And so I was a very school focused child. I didn't really play sports. I wasn't really like in clubs or like, I didn't have hobbies of my own. It was just like doing school stuff. And so when I graduated from college at 23, I kind of like looked around and I was like, oh, I like went to school. I got a degree. I have this job. everyone has been telling me my whole life that that's all you have to do. And now I've just like fallen off the cliff of now there's no one telling me what to do anymore. And like, I don't like, what am I working towards? What am I striving towards? Who am like, what do I care about? What matters to me? And you know, if you ever meet people who are just like really fucking psyched on something, like that is an energy that is so magnetic and like joyful. And I just had nothing. I was just like, I go to work, I go hang out in my apartment. I have a cat. Like I was drinking a lot at the time, which was like kind of my only hobby. And I just didn't really know what the next like X number of years of my life was going to look like because I had no goals. And then I stumbled across a blog about the Appalachian Trail when I was just like surfing the internet at work one day. And I was like, oh my God, like I like went down the rabbit hole. I was like, what's the Appalachian Trail? And then I started like looking into it. And then there was like these whole forums on the like corners of the internet filled with people who were just like, the Appalachian Trail is my entire life. They're just like, it changed my life. It made me a better person. It helped me do this. It helped me do that. I quit my crappy job and now I'm the happiest I've ever been. Right. Like it was just all these people with these like glowing reviews of their experience of like dropping everything and going into the woods. And I wasn't a hiker. I wasn't outdoorsy. I had no idea what I was doing, but I saw the spark of like these people talking about their thing. And I was like, I need a thing. I need something. I wanted to be about something. And I didn't really know what my options were. And I saw that and I was like, oh, maybe I'll try that. Maybe I'll see if that's my thing. And so I just like went into my mom's office and was like, I'm going to hike the Appalachian Trail. And she said, what is the Appalachian Trail?
Yeah, I mean, what was that like a completely foreign idea to your circle at the time?
Oh yeah. Everyone in my life was like, why would you do that? But I think they, you know, my mom, she really struggled with the idea. My parents both did. But other people in my life immediately got excited because of the way that I was presenting it, right? Like it was as if I'd like known these things my entire life and was just like waiting for them to burst out. But it was like, I just read this yesterday and now let me tell you how excited I am about it. And it was the first time I'd ever really felt that about something that wasn't something someone else had told me to do.
Mm. You decided for yourself, this is something I want.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that my parents didn't approve was almost like better for me. It like helped me to be like, this is my thing and it has nothing to do with you. Right.
Yeah. And Emma, I just think about this idea of energy. And when someone can talk about something or present something with energy, it doesn't really matter what the thing is. It's a very contagious feeling. You know, it goes back to storytelling and like when you are on the receiving end of like, wow, this person is really jazzed up about blank.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, it's a very, I don't know, it's difficult to describe, but it's kind of a magnetic feeling. And I feel like it brings us back to that thinking of like, wow, I just want something in my life that I can be as jazzed up about as this person is about blank.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love having conversations with people who have like really niche, weird interests, but they're like super into it. And I'm like, yeah, tell me all about it. Tell me what kind of tools you're using for that. And like, what's the gear like? And like, do you have a space in your house set up for this? Or like, where do you go? Is there a community in your town for it? Like, I think that stuff is really interesting. And I would say largely my interest has to do with the passion that people have and not at all to do with what the thing actually is. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Like, okay. So in that example, you know, let's say I tell you like, Christine, I am so passionate about underwater basket weaving. Why do you like learning so much about it? If it's not, I'm going to become an underwater basket weaver, what leads you to asking all of those questions and being so curious about it? What are you taking from an example like that?
I mean, I think a big part of it is connection. Like, one, like you want to talk about underwater basket weaving because you love it, right? And so having somebody there who's like truly engaged in that is like such a heart connection. I also think that maybe a little selfish part of it for me is I love to imagine myself in different lives. And so when you tell me all about your thing, I'm like, ooh, maybe I could be an underwater basket weaver. And I think that's like just a personality like quirk of mine that I like love to imagine myself in different scenarios. And I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not going to do that. Or maybe I'll go take like an intro class and then I can fantasize a little bit more about my life as an underwater basket weaver. But yeah, largely I think it's about emotional connection and like that energetic sharing with another person.
I totally agree. I think that's huge. I think that's a lot of the foundation of this show is like, can I just provide a space where someone can share some of their perspectives and some of their stories? I know how good that feels to be on the receiving end of like someone genuinely being interested in you, in your life. I just don't feel like that's something that we get that often in our lives where someone's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to really devote my time and my attention to you and be curious about the things that you are into. The other part of that I think about is I like to use like the toolbox analogy. I like hearing about people's stories and their perspectives. Goes back to how this show started, which was a conversation I had with a woman in a pool at a wedding that I was attending in Mexico. And she had just recently retired. And I was asking her for like 20 minutes about retirement. I'm 29. So yeah. I'm not in a phase where I'm retiring, but I think of it like putting tools in my toolbox to where, you know, I don't know if this thing is ever going to be relevant to me. Maybe it will be someday. Maybe 30 years down the line when I'm thinking about retirement, I might think back to this conversation. But it sounds like maybe you're kind of thinking of it of the same way of like, you know, I think there's something I can gain from this that I'm just going to store for later. And you never know when it might come up. Is that kind of how you're thinking about it?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's some aspect of that. I think one of the reasons that I think that we connect to other people's stories, even if those people are very different than us, is that like we think sometimes our experiences in life are like so unique and that we are, you know, dealing with the hardships that no one else understands, right? Like these, like everything that we do, we're special, la, la, la. But I think at our core, we are all experiencing the same human experiences. And they might look different from the outside, but like the emotional experiences of being a person and interacting with other people and existing in the world that we exist in, like we're all just having slightly different versions of that. And so I think if you can open your mind, just a little bit, it becomes really easy to see other people's life experiences as a reflection of your own. And when you hear stories to think, oh, how could I apply that lesson to my life? Or like, oh, this person has learned this thing. And where have I seen that in my experience as well? So yeah, there's always something to be learned. There's always something to be shared. Because we're all kind of just like doing the same thing, just like bumbling around, trying to be the best version of ourselves that we can, hopefully.
Yeah, it's amazing how it takes different formats, but if you boil it all down, we're all on the same journey.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go back to the Appalachian Trail because, all right, you kind of decided this is something I could get behind. This is something I could get excited about. You saw the community aspect of it. You learned about or read some of the reviews of people saying the impact it had on them. One of the things that you've talked about is if you're doing these long hikes, you have to have a really clear why. The idea of just like, well, I want to go tread up and down mountains for 5 months is not a strong enough, compelling reason to go do this thing. So what became your why for doing the Appalachian Trail?
I think that like wanting to be about something was pretty core to my why. Like it was just, you know, we have these romantic ideas. I'm going to find out who I am, right? I was 24 at the time. Like, yeah, very young and very unsure of myself. And so there was like a sense of, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do something hard and I'm going to do it for myself. And I'm going to do it even though people think that I can't. And I would say I'm very intensely driven by other people's doubt. And so a big part of it for me was like proving that I could. And it was partly proving to myself that I could, but it was also proving to like other people that I could. And that can be pretty motivating. Even to do something, you're like at a certain point, you're like, I don't even want to do this anymore. But like, I'm doing it to prove that I can. Yeah, I think my why was that for something like that, it's complicated. And I think at that age, there's so many things going on. that I could probably write down like 5 or 6 different reasons why I was out there. But I would say largely it was proving that I could do something. There was a sense of independence and like leaving home. And then, yeah, just trying to find something that like lit me up inside.
Yeah. Can you take us through, this feels like a sort of unfair question, but I'm thinking of Eileen and I currently have a friend, Deidre, shout out to Deidre, who is hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And, you know, I'm just trying to like envision some of what she's going through on a trail like this. And, you know, again, I know this is like an overly simple question, but I'm wondering if you can just take us through a little bit of maybe some of the ups and downs that you experience when you're going on this multi-month journey, a very physical journey, a very mentally taxing journey. Can you paint a little bit of the picture, and take this answer however you want or see fit, but can you paint for us somehow like what it feels like to be on a trail like that?
I think it's like a mashup of like the boring workaday, same day after day experience where it's like you get up in the morning, you stuff your sleeping bag into its bag, you fold up your sleeping mat, you put everything in your backpack, you fold up your tent, you eat breakfast, you walk, you eat lunch, you walk, you eat dinner, you walk. And then you like take all those things out of your backpack and like do it again. And there's something about that that's like, it's really lovely and simple that it's just like everything that's in my pack, I use every day. I set up camp, I sleep, I take camp down, I move it. And you find these little routines and like you get to the point where you can like set your tent up in like 45 seconds and you're like really proud of that. And like that stuff is, I think, where a lot of people find that like simplicity of life lesson that I think a lot of people get on trail, where it's like, maybe I just don't need all the things that I thought I needed. And maybe I just don't need all the stimulus that I thought I needed. And then as you're walking through the most beautifully epic, like wild places, and seeing things that you're just like, it's breaking my brain a little bit how beautiful this is. Which I'm sure you've experienced that, like living on the road and camping in beautiful, like waking up in the morning and like opening your door and being like, oh, it's just heartbreaking that everyone in the world isn't seeing this right now.
I totally feel that.
Yeah, there's just like this really intense soul feeling of like, the world is so beautiful. And most of us live in just like crappy apartments where we're just like looking out the window at someone else's crappy apartment. And that's just like how we choose to live. And there's something just like tragic about that. And that so few of us have made the effort to say like, I'm going to go out there and really see what exists. It's like beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. And you're just carrying these like big emotions that don't feel like they quite fit inside your body the whole time that you're out there. That was like so dramatic.
Well, but I haven't experienced it yet. I will experience it, but I've just got to imagine that it's not overly dramatic, because I mean, I feel so many elements of that, even when, I'll say this often as Eileen and I are just driving, and I'm just like, I mean, I'll be driving the van and I'll almost just like put my hand, up to my forehead, and she'll be like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I cannot believe this country and how beautiful and like all of the things that we are seeing. And there are moments where I'm almost moved to tears because I'm just like, this is unbelievable, and I cannot believe that I'm experiencing this in that moment. Now, I've got to imagine that becomes even more heightened when you are living in a tent and you're immersed in nature for months on end. So that doesn't feel overly dramatic to me.
Well, yeah, and it's like 14, 16 hours a day. You're just outside. Like there's nothing between you and the world. And I guess the other thing that you're experiencing is just like your body hurts all the time. Some people get really strong and then they're like, I just feel like $1,000,000 all day long. And like, I don't know if I really experienced too much of that. Even on the Colorado Trail, when I was in probably the best shape of my life, from like the third day, my glutes were so sore from going uphill. And then it was just like every uphill for the next 40 days. I was like, how are my glutes still sore? Like, have I not climbed uphill enough? But there's this like really cool awareness of your body that you get when you're moving all the time, where it's like you can just feel like each of your muscles kind of doing its thing, and like you can feel yourself getting stronger. And you can almost like feel the food that you're eating like turning into energy. Like there's such a heightened like bodily awareness of like all of the systems and your heart rate and your breathing and your digestion. Like you just get really intensely like in your physical self.
Was that a new experience for you? You know, one of the topics that you write about and talk about is this relationship to your body, and especially for women on some of these trails, and the relationship that people have to their bodies. You know, was that kind of a new sensation or experience where you were like that in touch or aware with your physical being?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause I was not a super active kid. Like I did PE things, but other than that, I did not do things. So like it also took me several years and several trails to develop. I would say on the AT, my nutrition was pretty bad and I didn't feel very good. And I wasn't quite making the connection because I hadn't experimented enough to realize like, oh, if I do this instead of that, I would feel better. And so it took me several years and like getting pretty into the like health food space and like learning more about nutrition, and trying different things in my body and finding things that I'm like, oh, like I can't have that, over the years. And so now when I'm on trail, I'm like, I can tell instantly if I've like accidentally eaten something I shouldn't, or something is not hitting me the right way. And I can like pinpoint like, oh, I know what it was because of how long it's been or whatever. But it did take quite a bit of time for me to develop that.
Yeah. Okay, so you go on this Appalachian Trail experience, and what happened? You came out and you decided I'm going to write a book, and then you decided I'm going to make all these changes. I mean, did you experience some of these like grand things that people talked about that they experienced in their lives? What happened? How did you transform while you were on the trail?
Things went awry on the Appalachian Trail for sure. I ended up hiking about 650 miles of the trail, which is like a third of the AT. My mom actually died while I was on the AT, and so I was processing grief. And I was not interacting with the trail community in the way that I thought that I would be, because suddenly I was like a sad girl whose mom just died. And so the way that I was interested in approaching other people and interacting with other people like shifted pretty dramatically. And I sort of, instead of searching for independence, now had this really heavy loneliness of like, I don't get to separate myself from my mom anymore. She's gone. And I don't get to go out and be like a strong, independent young woman because nobody cares. Right? Like asserting your independence from your parents is like very much a relational experience between you and your parents. And so that really changed what I was experiencing out there and what I was going through. And, so I ended up hiking, about a third of the trail. And then at that point I decided to go back to my dad's and spend the rest of the summer with him. 'Cause he was really struggling. And, you know, there was this like, I still got a lot out of the experience. I would still say it absolutely changed my life. I'm so grateful that I had already planned to do that, because then when my mom died, it was like, I guess I have to keep doing this now. And I think that the trail was a really powerful healing experience for me through that. But yeah, it wasn't at all what I thought I was signing up for. And then after that, I spent the summer with my dad. I moved to Denver for the first time. At the end of that summer, I lived in Denver for a couple of years, and then I bought my van and got on the road for the first time. And then I hiked the Wonderland Trail. And then that's what my book was about. So, and my first book is a memoir of the Wonderland Trail, but you also get all that story about the Appalachian Trail and sort of those intervening years. Because I think that was like, that whole experience wasn't really done until I hiked the Wonderland Trail. Like from the time I said, I'm going to hike the AT to the time I moved into a van and hiked the Wonderland Trail was sort of all like a 4-year process. of moving through a lot of ideas about independence.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about some of those ideas that you were moving through. What makes you say, it wasn't really the end of that process until you did the Wonderland Trail? So what were you exploring about independence?
Sometimes when you think something is going to help you and then it doesn't, and then instead of thinking, let me try something else, you just do the same thing over and over again for 4 years.
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Cool. Yeah, I think that I set out on this journey being like, I'm going to assert my independence. I'm going to figure out who I am. I'm going to go out there and do this thing. And then a bunch of other stuff happened, and I didn't really come away from the AT with what I thought I was going there for. And then over the course of the next 3 years, I was sort of just trying to make that happen, that story, the internal story that I thought that I was going to get. And it wasn't until I went on the Wonderland Trail and I started asking people about loneliness and about independence and about whether they thought through hiking was serving their self-knowledge and I was just like, I had these ideas about what this experience was going to do for me. Did you also have those ideas? And if so, did it? And how is that working out for you? And I think it was not until I was having those conversations that I was able to process and recognize that I was sort of ramming my head against a wall, trying to make something happen, and admit that maybe it was okay that wasn't happening, and it was okay to go a different direction.
Mm. So it's almost like you were wanting to go on these trails, on these experiences, in hopes that it would just, the gates would open and oh, wow, this is so clear to me now because I did this trail. Everything is now so clear. And you kept trying that, and that didn't exactly happen.
Yeah, it turns out, like many things, the trail is not going to solve all your problems. It is not going to answer life's questions. You will still have life's questions after you hike a long trail. Yeah. And I think also this idea, especially as women, I think we're told a lot about being strong and independent and taking care of ourselves and being self-reliant. And there's a lot of messaging around that towards young women. And I think sometimes people forget to present those ideas with any amount of nuance, which is also being part of a community is important. Also forming strong relationships is important. Also finding a partner who loves and cares for you doesn't make you weak and reliant. And you can have both independence and relationship and community and love. And those things are to be balanced, not to be excluded.
And is a powerful word. Both can coexist at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you see the relationship between independence and loneliness now? Because I feel some of that, Eileen and I talk about it often, where I don't know if we were necessarily seeking independence, but I think there was an element of that, wanting to create our own lives as we went and lived in the van and started traveling. And we're doing that. And sometimes it gets really lonely. We don't have that built-in community. We've made a lot of great van friends. We've met great people, you being one of them. But the reality of this nomadic lifestyle is you're not often in community with these people. Everyone's traveling and moving about. And so I guess I resonate a lot with this idea of this rhythm or balance of independence and loneliness. So how do you see those two things in this moment?
I think time spent alone can be incredibly valuable in terms of knowing what you're capable of and testing yourself in certain ways. And then I think on the emotional side, as a space for self-reflection and quieting of the mind. And if you're into meditation-y things, right? Spending time alone can be a really good way to know yourself and see who you are when no one else is looking, right? Those kind of things. I think there's a lot of value in that. I think that we don't have to do a ton of it to get that value. And I think that's where I went wrong, was just more alone time is better, right? More time by myself, the more I can do, the more I can reflect, la la la. Like I just went like really extreme in that direction. And now and part of it may also be age. And I think as I'm like getting to my mid 30s now, there is more of me that like seeks not just connection, but community, and a place of belonging, and like you like people who really care what's going on in my life, right? Like we have, I guess I wasn't raised in community in the same way a lot of people were, in that my dad was in the military. We moved around a lot. And so I was not raised like in a neighborhood where we like knew the neighbors, and there were just sort of like people who were around me my whole life. And I think I took for granted that that was something missing. And I just thought like, oh, I don't need that because like I've never had it, you know? And I think as I get older, I recognize that I would like to have roots somewhere with some people, you know, and like they don't even, this is like an interesting thing because I just spent 4 months at this like resort in the desert, and there's a lot of retirees there, and people who honestly I wouldn't go out of my way to spend time with. Like there are people who are very different worlds than me, very different life stages. I would not see them on the street and go like, I'm going to go have a conversation with that person. But there's something really lovely about existing in a community space where there's just like people who are characters and people who are like, oh, that's so-and-so. And like, that's their story. And like, people are different, and like, you're all here for whatever reason, and you're all interacting, even though maybe you wouldn't otherwise. And they do become a part of your life. And you can learn a lot, like we were talking about earlier, like learning from people. And that those connections are just as valuable as the people who you meet and are instantly drawn to and instantly connected to. And you're just like, oh, I could talk to this person for 10 hours. Like, I love them. Like we need an, like scale of connections.
Yeah. I sharing the same experience right now. And I was just kind of sharing with you, I think before we were recording, that we're staying at this, it's called Ovland. It's in Escalante, Utah. And we've been here for about a week, and it's kind of a upscale campground, upscale resort type deal. But it's been cool because in the mornings and in the evenings, there's a couple of these big fire pits, and there's this kind of, you know, community center. And naturally, people gravitate towards the fires. You know, it's cold in the morning, cold in the evening. And whether we're eating or just chatting, you know, it's been cool because I like to think that, just like you said, everyone is here for a certain reason. And it's interesting to hear, why are people here? And we can all bond over this shared experience of, well, we've all decided that of all the places in the world, we wanted to be here. We all happen to be here at the same time. And there's something kind of interesting and magical about that. I mean, I've got to imagine being on the trail and meeting people is like that elevated even more.
For sure. Yeah. And you would think that being on trail, you would first, you instantly have something in common with people, which I would say is the same where you are, right? Like you're essentially a campground. So like these are all at least a subset of people who are like camping. So right. Like, that does narrow it a little bit, but like on trail, man, you really get all kinds. Like there really are people that you're just like, where did you come from? Like, what is your deal? And so you do like, you meet really interesting people, but I think that the trail has this inherent, like people are going there searching for something or running away from something is really common. There does seem to be like, it's kind of shifting now because of the social media culture around trails. And there's a lot more people who are out there just because it's beautiful and just because they're like, oh, this seemed like a cool thing to do. But I feel like in 2015, it was like everyone was either looking for a big change in their life or running away from something, or a big change just happened in their life. So either someone just died, or they just went through a big breakup, or they just lost their job, or they just graduated from college, or they just retired. So it was like every person was going through some kind of transition. And I think transition points are really like magical in our lives. And it's cool to have a bunch of people together who are all transitioning at the same time, because I think we're really open to new ideas when we're going through transition, that allow us to connect with people that we wouldn't maybe not otherwise.
Yeah, I share the same belief around the magic of transitional times in life. What would be your, I don't think advice is the right word that I'm looking for, but for someone like me who has an interest in pursuing one of these trails and having one of these journeys, I don't know if we're two friends talking, which we are at this point. What would you say to me as far as pursuing these trails?
Stop thinking, start doing.
Perfect.
Just get a little of that, like, it can't be that hard attitude. And I think we do live in a world where like so much information is available to us that it can be easy to get bogged down and think like I need to learn everything before I go. But I think that there's so much you can learn as you go. And as long as you have the things that are going to keep you from dying out there, like really you can just bumble around, and like there's other people who are going to be bumbling around and you'll figure it out. And it's not rocket science. It's like walking with a backpack on.
I feel like I could do that.
Like you're probably capable.
I love that. I want to ask you before we go about your second book. I want to first ask and hear why a second book. What was it about the first experience, or about what you still wanted to share? What led to the second book? And then I want to hear more about the concept of it.
Yeah. After Alone in Wonderland came out, and I really enjoyed the process of writing it. I really enjoyed the process of putting it out there. And then I started to get responses from people and people saying, thank you for telling this story. And like, I really felt something when I read your book, and like the connection piece of it was so powerful for me. And I think I knew kind of right away that I probably wanted to write another book. But I didn't really know I didn't have a plan at all. And then for a couple of years, I tried to write a second book myself. And I know that I really want to talk about relationship to body. As somebody who, I have a chronic illness. I've had spinal surgery. I have dealt a lot with body image, body dysmorphia, eating disorder, and my relationship to hiking, and that relationship to body that I was talking about earlier, where you really start to understand, like, what am I putting in my body? How is it affecting me? How is it making me feel? Has like intensely increased my ability to have like a positive day-to-day interaction with my own body. And that has been a really wonderful growing experience for me. And I think that a lot of people, when they go out to do big things like hike a trail or like run a marathon or like do really challenging physical endeavors, a lot of times we're doing those things out of a place of loathing for our body. And we're doing those things to try to make ourselves better. And I certainly, like, that was definitely an underlying thing for me sort of through a lot of the things that I did early in my like hiking world. And I was like, I want to talk about that. I want to kind of delve into that and kind of pull it apart a little bit. And I tried to write that story. And I will say, I think I'm not ready to write that story. And it was harder than I thought it was going to be. And so after a few years of trying to make that happen, I had sort of gotten to a point financially where it was like, okay, I either need to like put another book out or I got to go get a job. And then also I recognized that I just wasn't there yet. And I thought perhaps that sort of in the same way I went on the Wonderland Trail asking a bunch of people about independence and loneliness, and that helped me figure things out. I thought, what if I just asked a bunch of other people about their relationships to their bodies? And I was talking to a friend at Appalachian Trail Days last year, and she was like, why don't you just write a book about, like, why don't you just like do a collection? And having a collection of stories was something I had thought about doing, kind of toyed with the idea, but I thought, oh, that'll be really tricky getting all these people to work together and like figuring out how to make that happen instead of just doing it myself. But yeah, once the idea was fully formed, where it was like, oh, I want to make a book about bodies, and have women tell their stories, then it was one of those moments where it was like, oh, I kind of have to do that now. Like once you've had the idea and you're like, oh, this is a really good idea. And I think the impact of it is worthwhile and that a lot of people would get something out of it. Then I felt compelled. I couldn't like sit on that.
It feels fitting for the conversation that we've had, just in that idea of you can maintain your independence in your story. You can still be a creator and an author, and you can bring other people, you can bring community into the story that you want to ultimately tell. That's a powerful reminder for me. I think I often get focused on, I have to create it. I have to be able to create it. And there's something really cool in aggregating people's stories. And now it becomes a reflection of everyone's story and not just your story. So I think that's really admirable that you recognized, maybe me trying to do this alone isn't working out the way that I hoped it would or thought it would. And allowing other people's stories to be brought in, I think that's really, really cool. So I admire you for that.
Thanks. That's very sweet.
If people wanted oh yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to go to, we've talked about the books. If people wanted to find either of your books, Alone in Wonderland or Blood, Sweat, Tears, where can they find them? Where can they find you online?
Yeah, so my website is ruggedoutdoorswoman.com. The books, and then I have some like merch, stickers, t-shirts, that kind of stuff available there. I am on Instagram and TikTok. I will say I'm much more on Instagram than TikTok, and that is my age showing, at Rugged Outdoorswoman on both platforms. And then, the books are also available anywhere books are sold. If you're a library person, you can request that your library bring them in. Or if you have a local bookstore, you can get it through them as well.
Awesome. Well, Christine, thank you for joining me. Thank you for being willing to share some of your story and perspective. I've got a few things that I've put in my life toolbox in case I should ever need to bring them back out. So I appreciate that, and I value our time together.
Yeah, this has been lovely. Thank you.
I'm curious if you are someone who has done one of these through hikes or one of these long hikes, been on one of these trails. Did the way Christine described it and the way that we talked about it, or the way that I'm seeing my friend Deidre go through it right now, does it kind of match some of your experience? I'd love to hear from you. You can either join the conversation on Instagram at A Level Deeper Podcast, or you can send me an email directly at aleveldeeperpod@gmail.com. It's something that I feel comfortable I want to do at some point. So I guess I'm just kind of in that information gathering stage and trying to understand a little bit of what it might be like, even though from my understanding, you can never really prepare for it. The other part of this conversation that stood out to me a lot was this idea around having a creative outlet. I definitely find myself getting trapped in the way of thinking that if I enjoy something, if I do something creative, as I talked about this podcast being one of those things, if I have this thing that I enjoy doing, I have to figure out a way to monetize it. I have to figure out a way to earn an income and make money off of it. And it does. I mean, it's been my experience that when I put so much pressure on doing that, it removes some of the fact that it's just something fun. It is something creative. It's something that I enjoy doing. So I'm going to keep exploring that relationship for myself around when can something just exist and just be because I simply enjoy creating it, and how do I find the balance between investing my time and energy into it and not expecting a return, but I feel like there has to be a limit at some point. I don't know. This is something I'm very much still working through or working on in full time. Similarly, I'm curious about some of your thoughts on this idea of having a creative outlet. Is it something that you found helpful to have something that you can go to and turn to just to express some of your creativity? Do you have a story of when you turned a creative outlet into a job or into something that produced money, and how did it affect you? I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Christine. If you enjoyed it, something you can do to help grow the show and spread these conversations is just to send it to somebody. Send someone a text, email, however you get in touch with people these days, carrier pigeon, and just send them the conversation and say, hey, I thought of you when I listened to this. And that would be really helpful to help grow the show, help get us in front of more people, and spread meaningful conversations. I'm really grateful for you for being here, for supporting this show, supporting this conversation with Christine. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, come back next week on Tuesday because we've got another episode to share with you. Hope to see you then.